Welcome. I'm Eve Young, Jerusalem Post economics and domestic affairs correspondent. I'm here today with Eliav Breuer, the Jerusalem Post political affairs correspondent. He's here to give us an overview of the current crazy political situation in Israel. Eliav, we've seen tons of protests kicking back up over the past few weeks. We've seen a mess with appointments of a new Shin Bet, Israel Security Agency head. We've seen a vote of no confidence in the Attorney-General. What is going on in Israeli politics right now?
It's great to be here. Thank you. What we're seeing now is a worsening of the situation that we've experienced over the past 2 years since this government took office, which is increasing attempts by the government to increase its influence and power over other branches of government. So that was kind of what the whole judicial reform was about, taking more power away from the courts. So all of this needs to be seen as part of that.
This is all part of one move and one process?
Yeah, it's all part of one move and process. And what we need to point out here is that the Attorney General is the functionary who oversees Israel's public prosecution. So she is ultimately responsible for the prosecution of Benjamin Netanyahu, who's currently standing trial for a series of corruption charges. So Netanyahu is technically prohibited from taking any action against the Attorney General because he's under a conflict of interest, which he is committed to by law.
So how did that work? How was he able to raise a vote of no confidence against her and have it pass through his government?
So what happened was he stepped out of the room, and Justice Minister Yariv Levin, who's also Deputy Prime Minister, was the one who actually was there when the vote was being held.
So Netanyahu himself didn't vote in the no confidence vote?
Rest assured, it wouldn't have happened without his permission and without his backing. So we see that in terms of the Attorney General, the explanation the government's giving is that the Attorney General is trying to stop them from working properly because she rules a lot of what they do is illegal. The opposite argument is that maybe the government should ask itself why the Attorney General is ruling everything that it does, not everything, but many of its initiatives are illegal, because maybe the government should try to break the law a little bit less. Also, it's factually incorrect because the Attorney General gives thousands and thousands of legal advice, legal advice documents to the government, and
like legal opinions on
legal
various
opinions
laws
exactly
that they want to pass, or
yes, on laws. All government laws get Attorney General approval. Every ministry has an Attorney General who answers to the Attorney General, and then so they all basically every government initiative has legal advice, and these are the people who are responsible for giving legal advice, including, by the way, in the war, the military legal establishment is responsible for making sure that Israel meets international law in its warfare. And some people have criticized the Attorney General and the military legal establishment for being too permissive. So not only are they, so some people have the opposite criticism, is that the Attorney General should be limiting the government's power more. But in any case, we see that the official reason the government feels it can't work with the Attorney General because it's blocking them from proceeding. But we know that the Prime Minister has a heavy conflict of interest here, which at the very least, raises very heavy questions about his attempt to remove the Attorney General. To answer your question, what flared up in the last couple of weeks is what we've been calling Qatargate, which is a new, which we'll talk about soon, which is a new investigation into ties between Qatar and the Prime Minister's office. Now, very soon after the Qatargate investigation became more serious, the Prime Minister fired the Shin Bet head Ronen Bar. This was a couple of weeks ago. Now, the government says, well, Ronen Bar, as head of the Shin Bet, failed to prevent the October 7th massacre. Ronen Bar himself said that he would be resigning before the end of
The end of his term. And the firing came soon after the Shin Bet put out its own report on October 7th, right?
Exactly. So the Shin Bet put out its own report at the end of February, and then the firing came a couple weeks after. So the prime minister's been arguing, well, he should have resigned after finishing the internal commission of inquiry that the Shabak did, that the Shin Bet did, and that's the official reason why the prime minister fired him. He says, I don't have trust in the Shin Bet. I don't respect his professional opinions. I think he failed on October 7th.
And this is seen by the public, right, as kind of the spark that starts off all these protests. Can you explain how?
Yeah. So the thing is that the prime minister, after October 7th, and for the past year and a half, has obviously had decent working relationship with Ronen Bar and didn't think that Ronen Bar needed to be fired. And the fact that now, the firing happened very, very rapidly without due process. He completely ignored, by the way, the Attorney General's directives that the firing had to go through a special committee. So the urgency of the firing raised serious concern that it has to do with the Qatargate investigation, which Ronen Bar, as head of the Shin Bet, is involved in. So we see a pattern, because we see that the attempt to remove the Attorney General, who's responsible for the prosecution of Netanyahu's corruption case, and we see the directive now to remove Ronen Bar, who is investigating the Qatargate case. So we see this from one perspective, we see this as part of the same attempt by the prime minister to remove the institutions and the people who are responsible for making sure that he respects the rule of law. And the reason that the protest kind of broke out is because the prime minister hinted that he wouldn't respect a high court ruling if the high court rules that the firing of Ronen Bar was illegal and that Netanyahu cannot fire him, or he has to go through a due process that may take longer. So he hinted in a tweet that he wouldn't respect the high court ruling. He said, I'm going to follow the law, and I respect the high court, and the law says that I can fire the Shin Bet head, and therefore that's what I'm going to do. So he didn't exactly say he wouldn't respect a high court ruling, but he basically hinted around
a constitutional crisis in which the government does not follow high court directives.
Right. And so a bunch of opposition MKs put it pretty bluntly: if the government ignores high court rulings, then why should any other citizen? And then what we have is something but not a democracy. So that's kind of a red line that many people believe that we've already passed a lot of red lines, but a red line of ignoring a high court ruling is something that is seen by the business sector, the large labor unions, the academia, and many concerned civilians as a red line that they're not willing to pass. So that's kind of what sparked the protests again in the past couple of weeks.
We've touched on Qatargate a little bit. Let's also, I think it's another very confusing situation with reports that are really hard to follow. Give us kind of the bird's eye view. What is the Qatargate scandal? Where does it stand?
So start from the end. The important part of the Qatargate scandal, without going into every single detail, is that during negotiations over the hostage deal over the past year and a half, in which Qatar and Egypt were the two central mediators, Qatar was allegedly funding members of Netanyahu's media team in order to influence the messages that were coming out of the prime minister's office. The Qatari, again, allegedly the Qatari agenda was for Israel to portray Qatar as being the central mediator and the one who brought about the release of hostages, as opposed to Egypt. We know that Qatar is affiliated with Muslim Brotherhood. They were funded Hamas, and Egypt, we know, is against the Muslim Brotherhood. The current Egyptian ruler overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood. So there's ideological and geopolitical tension between the two countries. So Qatar, as it's done in many other instances, we know tries to buy influence over the narrative, the press narrative. The reason we should care and every Israeli should care, other than the fact that foreign countries shouldn't be able to buy influence in the prime minister's office, is whether or not this affected Israel's ability to release hostages. We know that there are almost 60 hostages, dead or alive, who are still under captivity. Reports in recent days, again, I can't confirm these reports, but that Egyptians during the negotiation process complained that the pro-Qatari messaging coming out of the prime minister's office was affecting its ability to apply pressure on Hamas to free hostages. So to make a long story short, Qatargate is about whether or not hostages were not released, who could have been released, because of a foreign country's attempts to buy influence amongst the people closest to Netanyahu. So there's two options here. If it's true and Netanyahu knew about it, then that's something that's akin to treason almost, because you're basically sacrificing, some things that are like in the highest national security interest for reasons that aren't professional, and for money. Again, the prime minister isn't suspect here, but his close advisors are. So if he knew about it and was part of it, then that's akin to treason. If he didn't know about it, and his and all of his right, we have Yonatan Urich, who's his closest media advisor. We have Eli Feldstein, who was his media guy on the war. He was the liaison to the army reporters. If both of them were receiving funding from Qatar, and allegedly Feldstein for about a half a year was receiving his monthly salary from a businessman named Gil Berger, who via a Qatari lobbyist named Jay Footlick was paying money paying a salary to Netanyahu's media guy, Eli Feldstein. And if the prime minister didn't know about that, then he probably a lot of other things he doesn't know about, and he might not be the best manager at the moment. So
it's kind of a landslide either way, the way you're describing it.
Yeah.
If these suspicions or these allegations at this point really are true. The three of the people that you mentioned are currently under arrest, correct? We know that, we can say that now?
Yeah, so Yonatan Urich is under arrest. Eli Feldstein, who was already under arrest for another scandal, which we won't get into, he was under house arrest, but now he was put back behind bars. And Gil Berger was just announced this morning, who was the businessman who connected the Qatari money to the prime minister's aides, also is under house arrest.
Of course, we also have to say that Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief Tzvika Klein is also allegedly involved in this case. Can you give us the background on that?
Tzvika Klein traveled to Qatar at some point last year, and according to a tweet from a couple months ago, he was contacted after the trip by Eli Feldstein, who's a suspect in this case. And Feldstein set up interviews for him on mainstream Israeli television to talk about his trip to Qatar. So he had some link to Eli Feldstein, who's a major suspect, and currently Tzvika is also being investigated in this case.
And we don't have any new information on that right now?
Unfortunately not. Allegedly, the payment trail, the money trail went as follows. It started out from Qatar, went to Jay Footlick, who worked as a Qatari lobbyist. From Jay Footlick, it went to an Israeli businessman named Gil Berger for tax reasons. It didn't go directly to its final destination, which was Eli Feldstein. So Berger passed the money on to Eli Feldstein, while Feldstein was working as a military spokesperson for the prime minister during the war and during the hostage negotiations. So one might ask, why would Eli Feldstein need to be receiving a salary from Qatar if he was working in the prime minister's office? as far as I know, people in Prime Minister's office receive decent salaries. The reason is because legally, the Prime Minister's office wasn't allowed to employ Eli Feldstein because Feldstein didn't pass a vetting process that would have gave him access to classified information. So
a security clearance?
a security clearance, exactly.
He didn't pass a security clearance.
So Feldstein didn't pass a security clearance, and for that reason, the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office wanted to employ him, but they couldn't. So they, instead of not employing him, they basically had the state of Qatar via the money trail pay his salary for them.
Let's close it up with heading back to kind of the big protests. Are they going to make a difference? Are they having impact in the Knesset on politicians? It's kind of the biggest wave of protests we've seen recently. Is it making a difference?
I think that the only thing that can make a difference are the protests. And I think there's a direct link between the size and tenacity of the protests and the government's ability to move forward with moves that otherwise would be considered illegal or unconstitutional. Others might disagree with me on that, but from being in the Knesset, you can tell when there's a big loud protest going on outside that you can hear. There's a different atmosphere, and it has influence both on a psychological level and on a political level. Politicians are the current political currency is public opinion, and so the stronger the voice of protesters are, the more politicians will be eventually, even if behind the scenes, more likely to start, voicing something different. So we'll see.
Eliav Breuer, thank you so much.
Eve Young, thank you.